We need God's help to see spiritual reality. You know, there's a great story, many great stories in the Old Testament. I think when we don't read the Old Testament, we can miss out on a lot of the spiritual world. Elijah was a great prophet in the Old Testament. He had a servant. And Elijah was feeling pretty good, but the servant was all shaken up. He was nervous. In 2 Kings 6:16 through 17, in the Voice translation, here's Elijah. Have no fear. We have more on our side than they do. Praying, Elijah praying. O Eternal One, I ask you to allow my servant to see heavenly realities. Whew. I don't know, that gives me the chills. Maybe you're sitting at home today and you're going, that didn't give me the chills. Come on now. That's like somebody hitting the buzzer beater in March Madness. Oh, Eternal One, I ask you to allow my servant to see heavenly realities. The Eternal awakened Elijah's servant so that he could see. This is what he saw. The mountain was covered with horses and chariots of fire surrounding Elijah. They were under duress, under attack, if you would. And Elijah said, I'm not worried, because Elijah could see the spiritual realities, but the servant couldn't. You know, when we sit there and we say, well, I'm bored as a Christian, then you're not seeing spiritual realities, and you need God's help. Pray that God will help you see. It's not the person you're angry at. It's the forces of darkness working on you. When something happens, pray that there's a battle going on. There's a serious battle going on, and we're in the middle of it. You know, with the war in Ukraine going on, it doesn't sound like a good idea to be talking about war in a sermon or a message or a one quick thought, but it does. Because I think that most wars are instigated by people being on the wrong side of their spiritual life. I think dark thoughts, dark forces go to work on people, and they become wicked and evil. I'm going to grab Revelation 12, verse 7. Then war broke out in heaven. For a lot of us who've been going to church for years, we've maybe never read Book of Revelation because we think Book of Revelation is about crazy stuff. Look, when I'm talking about spiritual world and spirituality, I'm not talking about crazy stuff. I'm not talking about getting wacky and cruising around and thinking you're Samantha from Bewitched, or thinking you're Harry Potter and Harry Potter, or Hermione or Ron and getting yourself a wand. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about opening our eyes up to the fact that there is a God and there is much more to life than what we see. Then war broke out in heaven. See, that had nothing to do with us. We weren't there. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down. That ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. It's telling us the origin story. Here's why things got ugly. Because there was war, heavenly war, if you would. You know, one of the problems with Satan, or the devil, is a problem with mankind. It's pride. It's the point where we no longer want to worship God, we want to be God. And that's what happened. He was close to God, but then he wanted God's place. He wanted to be God. And God is the ultimate reality. And so Satan lost, of course. And he was fighting against the angels. He lost. He lost his place. And he was thrown to the earth. And that began the conflict and the war amongst us. Now you may say, that's ridiculous. Again, that's because you are thinking based on your human senses. You're saying, what can I humanly do to understand this? Well, let me help you. Very little. Because you have to add spirituality to your life. You have to add faith. Remember, we talked in episodes past about faith, that it's that absolute conviction in unseen realities. And for many of us, we're going to struggle. I just can't get myself to believe all that. Well, that's what you got to do. That's what believing is. In John 6:29, Jesus is asked, what must we do, Lord? What must we do to actually, follow you and be close to you? He says, you must work at believing in the one that God has sent. I think it takes spiritual work to believe in the unseen realities and to believe there's a conflict in the world. I think when we start getting angry at another race, angry at a neighbor, angry at a friend, embittered to the point of malice and wanting to hurt someone, we have to understand we're in the grip of the war and we're on the wrong side of it. Star Wars really had it right. There's a dark side that wants to draw us in, that wants to use our anger and our bitterness to draw us in. And the sooner we understand that what's happening in wars, what's happening in riots, what's happening in oppression, what happened with slavery, what happened with the Holocaust, all these things are driven because there's much, much more going on than we can see. And that leads us to the wonderful and great philosopher, Hannah Arendt. She wrote a book called The Life of the Mind, the groundbreaking investigation of how we think. There was a really cool article on Hannah Arendt on the standing up to the banality of evil. And it talks about the fact that born into a secular Jewish family, Arendt fled Nazi Germany in the 1930s, eventually settling in New York, where after the war, she covered the trial of Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann. In her report for The New Yorker and later published in her 1963 book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, a report on the banality of evil, Arendt expressed how disturbed she was by Eichmann, but for reasons that might not be expected. Far from the monster she thought he'd be, Eichmann was instead a rather bland, terrifyingly normal bureaucrat. He carried out his murderous role with calm efficiency, not due to an abhorrent, warped mindset, but because he'd absorbed the principles of the Nazi regime so unquestionably. He simply wanted to further his career and climb its ladder of power. What was Hannah Arendt saying? She's saying a significant number of people who were involved in the Holocaust, who were involved in the cruelties of Nazism, did not come at it being like, oh, I'm this really wicked and terrible people, which is why it took so long for people to see it, because, to quote Hannah Arendt in The Life of the Mind, the sad truth of the matter is that most evil is done by people who never made up their minds to be or do either evil or good. We oftentimes think saying, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong. There's a spiritual world going on where you can be cooperating with darkness without even realizing. Our ambition for self, our desire for power, our desire to beat, our competition with our neighbor or our friend. All these are utilized in the spiritual world for dark reasons. And we have to understand that the evil in this world is empowered when we choose sin. When we choose to go in a direction of darkness, then darkness can utilize us to further its purposes. That's thinking about the spiritual world. You may be sitting there going, I'm scared. Well, good, so am I. That's why we got to pray. Pray for this topic, which we'll try to continue to discover, and we'll get into the power that God has made available to us spiritually. Not the ability to speak in languages and heal people. That's gone. But the power to be transformed in our own life and to help others be transformed in their lives for good, for better, for change, for hope, for dreams. Romans 8:5, those who are motivated by the flesh only pursue what benefits themselves. Now think about the flesh. What's the flesh? The human senses. The flesh is when our whole life depends on the human senses. Can I smell it? Can I see it? Can I touch it? Can I move in it? Can I feel it? Is it real to me in my human senses? When we're motivated by the flesh, when that's all that guides our life is, what can I get? What can I touch? What can I have? What can I buy? Where can I go? Those who are motivated by the flesh only pursue what benefits themselves, but those who live by the impulses of the Holy Spirit are motivated to pursue spiritual realities. For the mindset of the flesh is death, but the mindset controlled by the Spirit finds life and peace. We can choose our version of reality if we give ourselves over to God. If we let Him move in our lives, we can do it. How do we choose our version of reality? What choices do we have? Let's cover that. Number one, we can choose to be religious. We can become a behavioral Christian who does not believe in spiritual power, who does not believe in the spiritual realities, who really doesn't believe in the spiritual world. I think it's time we really took a hard look at this and said, not everyone who believes in God believes in the spiritual world. Not everyone who believes in God believes in spiritual power. A lot of us settle into human effort, and that's why we're so frustrated. That's one version of reality. Another version of reality is to live a dull life, living an emotionally numb life of superficiality. Just dull. I'm dull to everything. I don't feel anything deeply. I'm not moved by anything. I don't admire anyone. I'm not inspired by anything. And I really don't live by faith. I'm just dull. I'm kind of numb. Worldly. There is a version of reality that's worldly. I'm living as though humankind are the center of the universe and the ultimate reality. I think man's the ultimate reality. I worship celebrities. I worship athletes and singers and writers and entertainers and artists. I worship politicians and business people. I worship moguls. I think that's everything. I want to be that. I watch YouTube and I want to be the YouTube person. I get on Twitter and I want to be the person with the blue check mark. I go on a vacation and I want to be in first class. My whole life is about what are other people doing that I want to have. I live in a worldly reality. I don't even think about it. I'm not even aware of something more. I'm consumed by it. And I'll tell you what, if you live that life, it'll be really hard for you to believe in God because you believe so much in people. Apathetic. I'm too stressed out by it all. I don't want to think about being religious. I don't want to think about being dull. I don't want to think about being worldly. I don't want to think about being spiritual. I don't want to think about anything. We ignore, we avoid, we're unthinking. We have an unthinking pursuit of pleasure without purpose or meaning. Remember The Matrix? And there was that one guy in The Matrix who was like, he betrayed Neo and everybody. And I don't even remember his name. I don't want to remember his name. We shouldn't remember his name. But he went back and betrayed everybody. Why did he betray everybody? He said, I don't want to have to think about it anymore. I want the illusion. When we get apathetic, we're like, I don't want to think about anything. Don't read the Bible to me. Don't talk to me about God. Don't tell me about your spiritual life. Don't tell me about anything. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to know. La, 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 la. I remember you used to do that as a kid. And finally, they're spiritual. That's the ultimate reality. recognizing and living with awareness of the existence of the spiritual world. One quick thought, we can do it. We can choose the spiritual reality and overcome the religious, dull, worldly, and apathetic realities that tempt us to forget that God is real.